begin the journey, but it's a wee bit of a bit complicated to get there, but we'll get there. It's all had to be done in a bit of a hurry, but it's well, I feel very privileged to have the opportunity to go, and I'm quite. It's really interesting the number of people who having seen the news that I'm going, have been in touch to kind of say to me how, just to sort of, I suppose probably can just, for me to go there knowing that I'm going there with their wishes to pay their respects, you know, so it's quite it's really quite.
From like the Catholic Church and stuff?
Yeah, just
all over, I imagine.
Lots of folk, people of Catholic faith and not the Catholic faith. It's really, but people who haven't heard. I suppose it's that natural thing. And folk that I know and people who've got connections with me who come on to me saying, well, so they feel that gives an ability for them to convey their connection. Right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we're good.
So the Herald's obviously from next week doing a series on child poverty. A huge issue for you and your government. One of the most central missions, I think you've said.
Yeah.
Yesterday in FM Hughes, I think you said that you were proud of your government's record. Do you stand by that?
Yes, I do. I think the government has recognised, we recognised some time ago, the centrality of reducing child poverty, and we took steps when we acquired powers in 2016, for example, or we acquired the powers in 2016 to take very direct steps to intervene in a way that no other part of the United Kingdom intervenes to introduce the Scottish Child Payment, which we did in 2018, and that is now that's now supporting families and keeping children out of poverty. And in the most recent data, we see child poverty rates falling in Scotland. They're rising in other parts of the UK and expected to rise further in other parts of the UK. So, yes, I'm proud of what we've done. Am I satisfied that we've done everything? No, I'm not. That's why when I was asked, when I became SNP leader on the 6th of May 2024, I was asked what would be the biggest priority of my government, and I said the eradication of child poverty, and I mean it.
When it comes up to that year, because it is only like a week or so away to your year in government, year as First Minister, do you think that you have done enough in that year to have been proud of what you've done so far?
Well, I've done the best that I can in that period, and what I see is a falling level of child poverty. But then what I also see is a government programme that is aligned behind the objective of eradicating child poverty. So if you look at the budget, for example, the very significant increase in housing expenditure, I would say is a child poverty measure. That's about investing in the housing stock to ensure that we reduce the levels of temporary accommodation. And in most local authority areas in Scotland, we're seeing the levels of temporary accommodation falling. They're rising in some parts of the country through a variety of pressures. So we can make investments such as the investment in housing to try to ensure that we tackle issue, that we actually put in place the measures to tackle void accommodation, for example. So that opens up new housing opportunities. These things help. We've got other measures such as the benefit support that we make available through Social Security Scotland to support families in other ways. We've obviously uprated the Scottish Child Payment, and we're taking steps through pupil equity funding to work to close the poverty-related attainment gap in education. So, and then amongst families, the work to support employability and to get parents into employment, good, sustainable, high-quality employment. All of these things will help us on that journey to child poverty. So what I would say, Rebecca, is that what I've done is I've aligned government policy emphatically behind that objective on child poverty. But I'm not for a moment going to say it's going to be achieved in a short space in time. It's going to take a lot of tenacious work to do that, and the reforms that we're hearing of from the United Kingdom government are going to make that challenge even greater as well.
The Joseph Rowntree Foundation is putting out a new report on Monday. Hopefully you've seen that. I sent it over, suggesting that 80,000 children might be in very deep poverty. They're suggesting that that's actually getting worse over the last decade. So although we are seeing that child poverty figures, the number in relative poverty is getting better thanks to things like the Scottish Child Payment, there's obviously this problem where the people in kind of very severe deprivation isn't getting better. What would you say to that?
I think that's a component of the challenge that we face. It's a very real issue, and we have to be incredibly targeted and focused in what we do to try to help those families out of poverty. So we did some intense work, for example, we have a Pathfinder project in Dundee, as an example, where we are working with the City Council, with the Department for Work and Pensions, Social Security Scotland, various third sector organisations, to really focus on how we deliver support that's linked all around about families, to make sure that we can tackle that deep-seated and deep-rooted problem. So I recognise that as a significant challenge. One of the things, and this might sound quite dry, but I'm a strong believer in whole family support, because you won't ever lift a family out of poverty just by giving them the Scottish Child Payment. In some cases, it'll make that marginal difference to income, but there will be many other cases where you need a combination of financial support directly through mechanisms such as the Scottish Child Payment, or you might have housing support required, employability, there may be mental health support, there may be addiction support, there may be transport costs, there may be early learning and childcare. Now, if you are living in deep poverty and you've got to try and weave together, I just went through 6 things there. If you've got to try and weave those all together, every one of those has got to work out perfectly. What our Pathfinder work is increasingly discovering is ways in which you can wrap that support around families, and the outcomes are so much better as a consequence.
Is it a source of shame that there are so many kids in very deep poverty for you?
Yes, it is. That's why this issue is so significant to me. I saw very directly when I was becoming Education Secretary, at the time I became Education Secretary. So I had a profound effect on me, because I then came into contact with communities, children and young people, in a wide variety of circumstances after about 6 years of austerity. And I saw a degree of suffering that I thought was insufferable, that had got worse because of austerity. So my support for the provision I made, for example, through the Scottish Attainment Challenge, pupil equity funding, was designed to help the education system to do that, to tackle that. Obviously around the cabinet table, I was supportive of the Scottish Child Payment, which helps with direct family support. I presided over the expansion of early learning and childcare, which was rolled out in 2021, which was another measure to tackle poverty. I increased the school clothing grant because I could see the effect. I thought, all children must be able to go to school with the dignity of being properly clothed, trying to do what we could to expand free school meal provision. All of these measures were a response to what I saw when I went in and out of schools in the country. I think it's in a 21st century country, it's a matter of shame that we have children living in poverty, children living in deep poverty, and I accept unreservedly my obligation as First Minister to tackle that.
I think for me, kind of having spoken to you about child poverty before, I think it is evident that you actually do take this seriously. It is evident that you do mean it when you say that you want to end child poverty. I think one thing that it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on would be the idea of the Scottish child payment being increased, because we do know that it's been described as a game changer. I think it's undeniable that the evidence is there that it is working, but charities that we're working with are saying that it needs to go further. I think there's evidence to show that if it was £40 per week, for example, that it would decrease poverty by I think 3 percentage points. We know it's just been increased. Of course, it's gone up substantially. But do you think there's any scope to increase it further?
I think there is first of all, I'm glad the child payment is at the level it's at just now. It was originally conceived to be £5 a week, and it's now about £26.70 in the last financial year. And I'm glad it's at that level. And I'm glad we're making the commitment we're making to that, because I think it's making a real difference to people's lives. And I've discussed this with child poverty campaigners, all of whom I respect. I've got them full of admiration for the work that they do. There is a fine balance that you have to strike about the level at which a social security benefit is set in relation to the incentives to enter employment. And I think we're at the limits of that just now. I think if we go beyond where we are just now, I think we reduce the incentive to actually enter the labour market. Now, when I say enter the labour market, I say enter the labour market to good quality jobs that are well paying, which is why the fair work agenda is so important to the government as well. But I want to see us in a position where we maintain the approach we've taken on child poverty is that there has to be a range of interventions that we make. Some of it has got to be about direct financial support, which is the Scottish Child Payment. Others can be about income maximisation. So that's about making sure that people are actually applying for and getting the financial support to which they are entitled. And the third is about meaningful employment. And you have to get the balance right between those. So my judgment, and I've been very open about this with the child poverty campaigners, my judgment, we're at the limits of that just now. But obviously I will continue to engage on that question.
One of the parents that I know you spoke to earlier this week, she's from the Changing Realities programme. She said that she had mentioned that she worries that when her son turns 16, he wants to stay on at school.
Yeah.
He will no longer be in receipt of the Scottish Child Payment, but she will still get child benefit for him. Do you think there's any scope there to kind of bring it in line, make it for under 18s?
I think can I say something about the Changing Realities programme? I take part in a lot of discussions, and one of my team, who sits through a lot of my discussions with me, said to me as we finished that meeting, that had a big effect on you. It was obvious, and it did. So the Changing Realities conversation that I had last Monday, not last Monday there, my goodness, time is going so fast. It was incredible, really powerful. One of the things about it, which the women who took part in it made clear to me, was that this had to be a genuine and substantive conversation where they were coming into the cabinet room. They sat where my cabinet sits, and they're having a conversation directly with me in which they expected me to fulfil the commitments I gave to them. And it was a really significant conversation, and that's the approach I take to it. That's how I'm viewing that. Now, on the specific point about which was raised is the post-16 arrangements. Now, obviously, if a young person stays on at school after 16, they are eligible for the educational maintenance allowance. So there's an interaction there that I've got to look at, which I said I would look at, to see if there is a way that we can, because if there's an issue that we need to address there, because I want to make sure that young people are able to be supported out of poverty. I want them to be able to achieve their educational potential, because achieving their educational potential is going to help to keep them out of poverty in later life. But what was put to me on Monday was a potentially difficult interaction of these factors, and I want to make sure that I address that properly.
It sounds like it really does affect you when you speak to the families affected by poverty.
Yeah.
I mean, how is it for you, like personally? Because obviously you have been Education Secretary, now you're First Minister. It must take a toll at some point hearing these tragic stories.
It's interesting. I had a very ordinary upbringing, but I wouldn't say we lived in poverty. You know, my dad worked, and we had, we'd a life. I wouldn't say we did not live in poverty. We had we didn't have an affluent life, but we had a comfortable life. My parents didn't have a lot of money, but they used their money to support us, and I'm profoundly grateful for that. But I went to a school where I rubbed shoulders with pupils who were living in abject poverty. So I saw in my teenage years abject poverty face to face, and I could see how difficult that was for some of the principally boys that I was rubbing shoulders with at that time. And of course, as time goes on, you see periods where the issue becomes less acute. So, to the credit of the last Labour government, for most of the early years of this century, child poverty was falling very dramatically, and Gordon Brown, as the Chancellor, took a lot of decisions which had a significant effect on reducing child poverty levels. So it was less prevalent. So I suppose there were periods of my political life where I was able to look at the issue and think, well, actually, we're going in the right direction. And it all took a dramatic turn for the worse after the financial crash and the start of austerity. And we've seen child poverty rising. And I do find it difficult to handle, Rebecca, to be honest, because I think it's very obvious to me the damaging effect of poverty on children. And I saw that acutely in my time as Education Secretary. I also saw the inventiveness of our communities and our education system to deal with that. So I saw a lot of schools exercise enormous dignity in how they, or creating a lot of dignity around about children and young people, about just supporting families, doing the quiet things that would engage with families, build relationships, and make sure they understood the financial circumstances and tried to help families out of that, and do it with dignity so that nobody was having an undignified experience. I was over in New York for Tartan Week, and there was a school's pipe band there. Well, there's 3 school pipe bands that I interacted with: the Oban High School, Renfrewshire School's pipe band, and the Falkirk School's pipe band. I was talking to some of the leaders of these pipe bands, and they left me with a very strong impression that they were absolutely determined to make sure that no matter the circumstances of a child who was introduced to musical tuition by the local authority with measures supported by the government, that any young person playing the pipes or playing the drums would be inhibited from joining that trip to the United States, and they've made that possible. I thought that was just another of these examples of what our schools do to make sure that opportunities are available for young people who are you know, where a triple of that would be possibly beyond them, but just making sure it was all done properly.
Just going to quickly do a time check. I want to spend a lot of time talking about Westminster policies, but just quickly, on the Scottish Child Payment, the idea that there's this disincentive to work if it's increased. Some parents have suggested that, and some charities as well actually, have suggested that might be offensive, to suggest that by giving them this extra help that it would stop them from working, kind of thing. Do you accept that?
I think you've got to, I think in all social security, I think it's inherently part of the discussion of social security levels that you have to be mindful of that interaction. I think it's unavoidable in whatever benefit you're talking about, if it's got any relationship to what is the actual resources that are available to a family as a consequence of working, you have to be mindful of all of that.
Mm-hmm. On Westminster, we know we can't really talk about child poverty in Scotland without talking about the UK government. We've kind of briefly talked about it in policies of the Labour government and the Conservative government. We obviously now see the two-child benefit cap is still in place, probably not going to be scrapped by the UK government. Scottish government is going to mitigate it from next year. If you didn't have to do that though, really that money that you're spending mitigating it could be put into other things like the community things like housing. So how difficult is that on the Scottish budget?
Well, we have got, you know, as you know, we have an obligation to live within the resources available to us. So we've got to make choices within a finite sum of money once we've decided what tax levels are and all that goes with it. So any decision we make, for example, to mitigate the two-child limit, which, you know, we're now putting in place the practical work to make that happen, and we'll then have to fund that in the next financial year, in 26-27. So you're absolutely right. You know, that money could be used for some other purpose, of which there are, you know, limitless other purposes. So that's again, and then of course that's not the first thing we're doing. We've only got the Scottish Child Payment, £450 million, because we want to make more of an impact on child poverty. If we didn't have the Scottish Child Payment, we'd have child poverty, would probably have, well, there'd be tens of thousands of children that would be in poverty that aren't in poverty today. So there's always choices in public policy, and we are anxious to do as much as we can to try to eradicate that suffering.
And just before we wrap up, what do you think about Keir Starmer's inability to scrap the benefit cap?
Like I genuinely struggle to work out what is the point of the Labour government if it's not about eradicating child poverty. Now, and I made this point in my contribution to First Minister's questions yesterday, where I invited Parliament to think, well, what is the point of a Labour government that's come into office promising change, and as a consequence of its actions on welfare reform, 50,000 more children are going to be put into poverty? I'm bewildered by that, because I then go back to what I said earlier on in our conversation. I've seen periods where a Labour government has come in and used its power to reduce levels of child poverty. It's incredibly welcome. But what is the point of a Labour government if it's not eradicating child poverty? And consciously, actively, a Labour government is making a policy choice which will increase levels of child poverty. I just can't fathom that.
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thank you.